In late December 1924, a man made an extraordinary discovery, a cave that he believed would transform his life. He spent weeks tirelessly digging into this cave, but when he finally gained access, a small mistake left him trapped beneath rocks, freezing and starving with no escape. The efforts to rescue him attracted thousands to the site, even capturing the attention of the US president, but none of this was enough to save Floyd. This is the heartbreaking story of Floyd Collins. William Floyd Collins came across Sand Cave in late December 1924. For him, this was a life-changing moment because the cave was situated near a highway, making it highly accessible to tourists. Sensing a business opportunity, Floyd quickly made a deal with the landowners to split the profits 50-50 from any future tours or exploration of the cave. Floyd wasted no time and immediately began working to open the cave, as it was still a narrow and dangerous passageway that few had dared to explore. This lack of a proper entrance deterred many potential tourists, but Floyd was determined. Over the next several weeks, Floyd dedicated hours each day to digging out rocks and widening the cave's entrance, trying to make it safer and more inviting for visitors. His goal was to turn the cave into a tourist attraction that would provide him with a steady income. After a few more days of intense work, Floyd was close to achieving his goal. On January 30th, 1925, he decided to venture into the cave again, unaware that this would be his final expedition. That day, the weather was cold and snowy as Floyd entered the cave with his trusty kerosene lantern. Having spent so much time working there, he had become accustomed to the cave's darkness and dampness. Navigating the tunnels posed no real issue for him anymore. He lowered himself through the first crevice, dropped to his knees, and began crawling forward. Eventually, he reached a point where most explorers turned back a narrow passage known as the squeeze. This opening was just 9 inches tall, a gap so tiny that even a child would have difficulty passing through it. For years, no one had dared to venture beyond this point, but Floyd, always fearless, decided to take on the challenge. He laid flat on the ground, pulling his body through the tiny space by pushing with his feet. The walls of the tunnel were lined with sharp gypsum crystals that scraped against his clothes and skin, making the journey painful and slow. However, Floyd persevered and eventually emerged on the other side. On the other side of the squeeze, the cave opened up slightly, giving Floyd a bit more room to maneuver. Ahead of him was a ledge that dropped into a narrow pit, which he had partially opened on previous trips by removing some rocks. This pit, however, was still very small, about the size of a chimney. Carefully, Floyd lowered himself feet first into the pit, mindful of the sharp rocks that surrounded him. As he descended, his excitement grew. He was getting closer to the large cavern that he had been working so hard to reach. This was the main section of the cave that Floyd believed could be a significant tourist attraction. When he finally reached the bottom of the pit, his emotions overcame him. He had done it. He had discovered the main section of Sand Cave. For a moment, Floyd stood there in awe, taking in the magnitude of what he had just accomplished. However, his joy was short-lived. As he admired the cave, he noticed that the flame of his lantern was flickering, a clear sign that it was about to go out. Not wanting to be left in total darkness, Floyd decided it was time to leave. He climbed back up the narrow pit with care, knowing how fragile the cave's structure was. When he reached the top of the descent, he pushed his lantern ahead of him, but as fate would have it, the lantern slipped from his hand, crashing to the ground and extinguishing the flame. Floyd was now in complete darkness, but he refused to panic. He knew the cave well enough to find his way back out, even without light. Slowly, he began pushing his way through the narrow opening, careful not to disturb any loose rocks. Unfortunately, as he maneuvered his body, his foot knocked a large rock out of place. The rock tumbled onto his left leg, trapping it in a small crevice. At first, Floyd thought he could free himself. Using his other leg, he tried to push the rock off, but the more he struggled, the more rocks fell on top of him. Soon, his hands, legs, and even his head were pinned beneath the debris. Trapped and immobilized, Floyd began to shout for help, but deep in the cave, no one could hear his cries. Hours passed with no rescue in sight. As night fell, Floyd remained stuck in the cave, his body growing colder and weaker by the minute. He could do nothing but hope and pray that someone would come looking for him. The next morning, 2 of the property owners, Ed Estes and Bill Doyle, arrived at the cave to check on Floyd's progress. With them was Doyle's 17-year-old son, Jewel. When they reached the cave entrance, they found Floyd's coat and hat but no sign of him. They called out his name but received no reply. Concerned, Jewel, who was slender enough to fit through the narrow passageways, ventured deeper into the cave. After a challenging crawl through the squeeze, he found Floyd, who was stuck beneath the rocks but still alive. Floyd was overjoyed to see Jewel and immediately asked him to fetch help. Jewel hurried back to the surface and alerted Floyd's family. Soon, Floyd's brother, Marshall, and their father, known as Pap, arrived at the cave, where a small crowd had already gathered. Word of Floyd's situation had begun to spread. Marshall and another man entered the cave, but like many others, they were unable to pass through the squeeze. Homer Collins, Floyd's other brother, was determined to save him. Guilt weighed heavily on Homer, as Floyd had invited him to explore the cave together that Friday morning, but Homer had declined. Now, he was desperate to make up for that decision. News of Floyd's predicament spread quickly, and soon, people from the surrounding area gathered at the cave entrance. He pushed his way through the crowd of nearly 100 people and entered the cave. Ignoring the pain from the sharp rocks cutting into his skin, Homer squeezed through the tunnel, finally reaching his brother. But Floyd's condition was worsening by the hour. The bonfires that people had started outside the cave were causing the ice to melt, sending more freezing water down into the cave. Floyd was wet, cold, and losing strength. Despite the conditions, Homer stayed with his brother for 8 hours, doing everything he could to comfort him. Floyd told Homer about the cave he had discovered and how he would never go back in once he was free. But as much as Homer wanted to save his brother, he was forced to leave the cave when exhaustion and injuries overtook him. When Homer emerged from the cave, he was furious to see that the crowd had grown even larger. Reporters had arrived, eager to document the rescue attempt, and they swarmed Homer with questions. Enraged, Homer told them to go see the situation for themselves. Later in the afternoon, more people attempted to reach Floyd. Some succeeded, while others couldn't navigate the treacherous cave passages. One man eventually emerged from the cave with grim news: Floyd was dead. Another came out shortly after and informed reporters that the pit had caved in, making it impossible to reach Floyd. Marshall, Floyd's brother, was devastated. Determined to confirm the truth for himself, he offered a staggering reward, a huge sum for that time, to anyone who could successfully enter the cave and provide an update on Floyd's condition. Despite the reward, each person who tried came out with the same unfavorable report: dead, not seen, caved in. As the evening drew near, Homer, Floyd's other brother, decided to go in once more to verify the news for himself. Heart pounding and fighting exhaustion, he pushed his way through the narrow tunnels and finally reached his brother. To his immense relief, Floyd was still alive. Floyd's voice was weak, but he was conscious and coherent. Homer felt a surge of hope and immediately set to work, carefully removing as many rocks as he could. For the next several hours, he toiled relentlessly, clearing debris and trying to free Floyd's body from the rocks that pinned him. By the 4th day of Floyd's entrapment, Homer managed to free his brother's hands, a small but significant victory. Floyd was grateful and asked Homer and the other rescuers to tie a rope around his chest so they could pull him out. It was a moment of hope, a possible breakthrough after days of despair. On Tuesday morning, Homer descended into the cave once more, this time carrying a harness designed to help pull Floyd out of the cave safely. With the harness in place and everything set, the men above began to pull. For the first few moments, they made some progress. Floyd's body shifted slightly, inching out of the narrow passage that had trapped him for so long. But then, just as they thought they might succeed, Floyd screamed in pain, "Stop. I can't stand it. It's going to pull me in too." The rescuers halted immediately. The pressure of the harness was too much for Floyd's weakened body, and it felt as if it might tear him apart. The attempt had to be abandoned, and once again, Homer was left with no choice. The crowd outside the cave swelled to over 1,000 people, turning the rescue effort into a public spectacle. Hotels in the area were booked solid, and prices for food and supplies skyrocketed as opportunistic vendors took advantage of the crowds. But inside the cave, things were getting worse. The sheer number of people moving in and around the cave entrance was destabilizing the rock formations. On February 4th, the worst happened: the entrance to the pit collapsed entirely, cutting off all access to Floyd. Although no one was injured in the collapse, it meant that Floyd was now completely unreachable. In a desperate attempt to save him, workers began digging a new shaft into the cave, hoping to reach Floyd before it was too late. For days, they labored tirelessly, but the effort was slow and dangerous. Inside the cave, Floyd was growing weaker by the hour, deprived of food and water and suffering from hypothermia. His body was slowly shutting down. By February 13th, the workers had nearly reached him, but their efforts came too late. On February 16th, 1925, Floyd Collins was found dead, still trapped in the cave where he had spent his final days. Floyd's death was a tragic end to a story that had captivated the nation. Although the rescue attempt had failed, Floyd's legacy would live on. That's it for today's video. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more related content.